I am a scholar in the humanities, and my work has mainly involved in research and teaching at universities. After studying at universities and institutions in Japan, France, and other countries, I am now teaching art and philosophy at my alma mater, the University of Tokyo. When I say this, some people find it a little strange. Art and philosophy, are they not completely different fields? And of course, it is natural to think so. But in fact, there is a discipline that connects the two, and that is what we call aesthetics. To help you understand what I do, let me briefly explain this field. For many people, the word aesthetic sounds a little mysterious. Some think of beauty salons or perhaps a personal philosophy of life. That's quite understandable because in everyday life, the word aesthetic is used in many different ways. In English, there is a word, aesthetician, meaning a specialist in aesthetics. But I rarely use it, since it is almost always misunderstood. So when introducing myself in English, I usually just say I am a philosopher. What I would like to share with you is that in the humanities, aesthetics is one branch of philosophy. Just as molecular biology is a branch of biology, or quantum physics, a branch of physics, or macroeconomics, a branch of economics. So philosophy also has its own branches, such as epistemology, ethics, philosophy of mind, and so on. Aesthetics is one of them, a field that seeks to understand our sensory experience from a philosophical point of view. Aesthetics was established in mid-18th century Germany and has continued to develop ever since. The term aesthetica, from Latin, was coined by the German philosopher Baumgarten. He introduced the term aesthetics and defined it as a discipline dealing with human sensuous cognition. But I will not go into detail today, since this is not a lecture in the history of philosophy. But if I may name just one major figure, it is Immanuel Kant. His Critique of Judgment, published in 1790, has long been regarded as the central text of modern aesthetics. Even today, anyone studying aesthetics is expected to read, at least once, Kant's notoriously difficult work. Anyway, with philosophers such as Kant, aesthetics was established as philosophical theory. At the same time, in that very period, the modern concept of art was also being born. So here is the key point. Modern aesthetics, founded in the 18th century, is a philosophical discipline that studies how our senses work. And at the same time, it is deeply involved with art as its concrete object. In other words, aesthetics stands between philosophy and art. It tries to understand art, but also uses art to rethink what it means to perceive, to feel, and to think. The idea of art, as we understand it today, took shape in the modern era. In earlier centuries, the work of painters and sculptors was not clearly distinguished from craft. Of course, great masters such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo had long existed, but their works were not yet regarded as art in the modern sense. Their creations came to be recognized as art, as an independent domain separated from religion and power, only in the modern era. More concretely, in the 18th century, a new idea emerged that among all human productions, the most creative ones deserve to be called art. Art, in turn, appeals our senses and allows us to experience beauty and emotion in concrete form. So much for the background. Let me turn to my own work in aesthetics. As in any field, some researchers prefer to focus on concrete case studies, while others devote themselves entirely to abstract analysis. In aesthetics too, one can study a single artist or a single work, for example, an artist like Marcel Duchamp or a work such as The Large Glass. Or instead, one can start from multiple works of art and pursue purely philosophical questions. However, I have always found it difficult to choose just one of these paths. To be honest, I wanted to do both. What fascinates me in aesthetics is precisely this scope. On the one hand, I can immerse myself closely in artworks. On the other, I can step back and engage in philosophical reflection. Sometimes I give my full attention and sensibility to the appreciation of works, and sometimes I speculate on what can be drawn from them. For me, the real appeal of aesthetics lies in this movement back and forth between the two worlds. Perhaps I choose this path because I have always loved creating things with my own hands. As a teenager, I played basketball in school clubs, but I was more often drawn to artistic or cultural activities. I was especially passionate about music. I first picked up a guitar when I was 10, inspired by rock bands. In high school, I started making music with friends. In the 1990s, it was still unusual for students to produce music on computers. So we recorded instruments and vocals ourselves using a multi-track recorder. And as an undergraduate, friends and I even released a few CDs from a small independent label. And I also organized small club events in Tokyo during the 2000s. And some of those events were even held here in Roppongi. Today, I no longer make music. My friends and I have already closed our label. And none of that music is on streaming platforms like Spotify. In that sense, I am already retired. Alongside music, I also became deeply interested in photography. In high school, I met a photographer who introduced me to the process of taking and developing photographs. I learned to shoot with a film camera and to develop and print photos in the darkroom. I continued this through high school and university, exhibiting my work several times in Tokyo. That was about 20 years ago, but if you dig deep enough online, you might still find some traces of the shows I did in my 20s. And unlike music, I have not completely retired from this activity. Even now, as a private individual with some academic background, I occasionally show photographic works. I believe that academic research does not always have to take the form of books or articles. Sometimes a scholar can produce an installation just like an artist. Fortunately, because I had some experience in music and photography, I could occasionally present works, especially when I was teaching at an art school located in Kanazawa. These experiences made me reflect more deeply on my position as a researcher. Throughout my teens and 20s, I spent most of my time making music or taking photographs. Yet even then, I was fascinated not only by making things myself, but also by thinking about works made by others, such as films and comics, and writing about them. Looking back, I think I was torn by a deep inner conflict. I wanted to be engaged in art, but at the same time, I wanted to engage in pure theory, like philosophy. For someone like me, caught between these two desires, aesthetics seemed the one discipline that could embrace both. Not art history, not curatorial studies, not cultural policy, but aesthetics was the field I was seeking. I also remember having a kind of revelation. In March 2005, just after finishing my undergraduate studies and wondering what to do with my life, I traveled to Paris, where my partner was living. In a bookstore, I came across a French book titled Malaise dans l'esthétique. It was later translated into English as Aesthetics and its Discontents. It had just been published the previous year by the philosopher Jacques Rancière. He's now quite famous in the art world, but at that time he had only just started writing about aesthetics. The book began with a striking line, quote, "Aesthetics has a bad reputation," unquote. L'esthétique a mauvaise réputation. Why bad? Some philosophers, in a Platonic spirit, argued that beauty is an ideal. All beautiful things in this world, they said, are mere imitations or simulacra. Others, on the contrary, as empiricists or pragmatists, claimed there is no such abstraction as beauty. There are only individual aesthetic experiences, they said. So debates about beauty have long oscillated between these extremes of idealism and realism. As you can imagine, Rancière pointed to the impurity of aesthetics in a positive sense. Aesthetics belongs to philosophy as theory, yet at the same time, it interacts with contemporary art and design. In a sense, it is a hybrid discipline living between two worlds. At the time, I did not fully understand it, but I was deeply drawn to this idea of impurity. And now I am convinced that this impurity is the greatest strength of aesthetics. Just recently, at a symposium, I introduced myself as someone with a rather ambiguous identity. In philosophical gatherings, I call myself an art person. And in art gatherings, I call myself a philosophy person. Pure theory, isolated from reality, is always weak. But practice without theory also runs into limits. In art, this corresponds to the relation between reason and sensibility. If we only theorize about art, we can never truly understand actual works. But if practice is driven only by artistic sensibility, it cannot find its proper place in social and historical contexts. Aesthetics, precisely because it is impure, can move between the two worlds. That is why I strongly believe in its value. But of course, to prevent from sounding like mere advertisement, I have tried to put it into practice in various ways. I have written exhibition reviews. I introduced art theories in various languages. I moderated artist symposia, and I served as a judge for a competition. As I mentioned earlier, when I was teaching at an art school located in Kanazawa, I even presented my own works again. Needless to say, I have great respect for the professionalism of artists, curators, writers, and producers. What I do may seem halfway, neither fully one nor the other. But I believe it is important for academics to be present, at least occasionally, in the space of artistic creation. This sense of being between is not something I practice alone. I have friends and colleagues around the world who share a similar way of thinking. Among them, one of my closest friends is the Bulgarian philosopher Boyan Manchev. We first met more than 10 years ago, and we quickly became friends because we had a similar taste in music. Since then, except for the pandemic years, we have organized joint events almost every year, either in Sofia, in Tokyo. He's both a philosopher and a practitioner, someone who teaches at art academies, such as the Berlin University of the Arts, and who founded his own performance collective, Meteor, in Sofia, Bulgaria. I have known him for over 10 years. I probably talk with him about art and philosophy more than with any of my Japanese friends, even though we meet only once or twice a year. Conversations with him always open new horizons, because philosophy and art do not remain confined to their own spheres, but stimulate each other. Looking back on such encounters, I think I have always wanted to stay in motion. I have very few material desires, but I cannot live my life without touching new worlds through my senses and without trying to put those experiences into words. To put it a little dramatically, I do not want to be confined to one single world, and I do not want my students to be confined either. Moving between two worlds is, of course, a joy, but it is also a challenge. Because one cannot settle into a single value system or a way of doing things. At times, reason betrays sensibility, and sensibility betrays reason. But to embrace this tension, this is the very appeal of aesthetics. That is why I try to follow my desire. Sometimes I find myself among philosophers, and sometimes among artists. Both worlds are indispensable to me. Without either, I would feel constrained. If this way of life, between philosophy and art, between academia and creation, can contribute even a little to both worlds, I would be truly grateful. I have shared with you my position as someone who relates to the world of art partly from the outside, and the discipline of aesthetics that makes this position possible. But of course, moving between different worlds is not unique to me or to aesthetics. I believe many of you also move between different worlds in your own ways. I look forward to hearing about such experiences from you as well after this talk. Thank you very much.
So you describe aesthetics as a living practice. How do you think this view of aesthetics is important for society today? So you said impurity and ambiguity as to aesthetics. What is the importance to the society?
Thank you for Liu-san for your question. So I would say the importance of being in between is that in our societies, there are so many divisions, and each person has its own worldview, and we can enlarge our point of view with others by some like encounters like this. So if we don't have a position of being in between, we are forced to be confined in our own worldview. So in order to enrich, in order to enlarge our value system or like worldview, we have to go outside and contacting others. So in order to have such a mindset, I think we have to have such a kind of a thinking of in between. So that's one importance of aesthetics in our society.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoshino, for a very interesting introduction of your theory. My question is, when we talk about aesthetics or sense of beauty, how do we feel it? How do we sense it? I mean, we have 5 senses, and also we have sort of a reason to think theoretically about everything. Where does the source of aesthetics lie? Is it something abstract, or it is something that comes from material like roses or whatever, the sky? In other words, aesthetics is something abstract or something that is deeply attached to materials. And secondly, in your work, do you see any difference in Japanese and Western approaches to aesthetics? Because we often say that Japanese find beauty in nature, not human mind. So that is my second question.
Thank you very much for your question. So I try to respond to your two questions. And so, but it's a bit a kind of a lecture in philosophy or something like that. But in the 18th century, there are 2 standpoints concerning aesthetics. The one is by Immanuel Kant, the other is by David Hume. And Kant's system is kind of top-down. We humans have some sense of reason and understanding and the sense, 5 senses. So, like, on the contrary, David Hume was empiricist, and his model was bottom-up, as I said, because according to Hume, we humans have 5 senses. It is the first step. And then we organize our 5 senses as a conceptual or more abstract recognition. And so in the 18th century, what's interesting is that there were these 2 kinds of model of aesthetics. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think intuitionally, Hume's model is correct, I think. So we humans do not have such a kind of prerequisite system, and our conceptual or abstract recognition starts from our senses. And then we makes our like ideas through words and something like that. So that's the basic ground concerning the theory of aesthetics. And then, concerning your second question, the difference between the West and the East about feeling the beauty. So, yes, there are some differences, historically speaking, between the East and West. However, in Western society as well, also in the 18th century, the model of the aesthetics was nature. So Kant himself and other philosophers elaborated their theory of aesthetics, watching the mountains and volcanoes and earthquakes, something like that. So the nature was the primary. It was the common starting point of the aesthetics, both in East and West. But of course, Japanese kind of aesthetics was strongly influenced by Chinese philosophy. So concerning that point, there are some differences between the two civilizations or two cultures.
Thank you very much, and Professor Hoshino Sensei. Very inspiring story. And also, I'm very much impressed that you live in the two different worlds as a philosopher and artist. Yeah. Well, my question is that early slide you discussed, you made a discussion that the back and forth between the pure speculation, kind of the other, and also say the case studies. Well, I would like to hear from you. You to share one of the most the inspiring case you touch upon. That means that I assume that you find out a certain specific artist or artwork, or art fair, what kind art activities, those things. And then please talk about tell us that specific case, most the inspiring, most the unexpected, whatever, most impactful to you. And the related question is that how that case back into your pure speculation, hypothetical case that enrich your hypothesis, in what way?
So for me, it's always difficult to say the most inspiring cases because there are so many cases I have experienced in the world of contemporary art, in music and films. But when I was 20s, I've been to so many performances by experimental musicians. So for example, Japanese noise musicians such as Keiji Haino or Mehrz Bar, Masami Akita, or other experimental musicians influenced me a lot. So I remember that when I was early 20s, there were no SNS, there were no rich information in the internet. So I was always wandering all over the Tokyo city. And so when I go to the cinema, I picked up so many flyers of the other films. And so when I go to the live house, I picked up so many flyers of the other events. In that way, I picked up so many informations while wandering in the city. So in this way, I collected so many inspirations or stimulations from all over the genres. So for me, the first impression came from the noise music, as I said. And then I came into the world of contemporary art, and so on. So is that okay for your question?
Thank you very much, Hiroshi-san. Then,
Thank you very much, Mr. Fushino, for your great presentation. I just would like to ask about, especially about sensibility. Would you elaborate about these words? Because sensibility is different, person to person, more individual issue. So then, what is the role of the sensibility in your theory or something?
Thank you for your question. So I'd like to reply from an academic, from a researcher of aesthetics. The main task of aesthetics is to examine our sensory experiences or our sensory cognitions. I mean, as you know, as you said, all of us have a different sensibility. So everyone has their own sensibility. But we can examine the response of the audience when they are going to some performance or museums. Like we can examine how they react to the artworks or to the performance. Of course, they are all different, and generally speaking, the reaction to a single artwork is different depending on the audience. But it is the starting point of the practice of aesthetics. So more concretely, if you examine your reaction to some artwork is the very starting point of the practice of aesthetics. So we feel, we think, we react against the artworks in front of us. And we ordinarily enjoy that art piece. But if you start examining your senses, your feelings, your reactions, it is the very starting point of aesthetics.
Talk. Thank you. My name is Duncan Clark. I work a lot in technology. I'm actually looking at you in virtual classes. I'm translating what you're saying into different languages to see this. But the sense of AI challenging, boundaries between the physical and the virtual, and then the role of ethics in that. I mean, every conference has to have a question on AI. I'm going to ask the question. So, how do you feel ethics can be embedded in an artificial world, and also how do we as humans manage the balance between the physical world and the virtual? Because what you're saying between basketball and music and between art and philosophy, I mean, these types of liminal spaces are becoming so central to humanity now. So what's your thought on where are we headed? Are we okay?
Thank you very much for your question. It's a very hot topic. So talking about AI, I have a lot of things to say. So many people says about that, but I would like to say what's important is our physical experience, bodily experience. So if in the future, if some AI has their own body, that is next step. But now they don't still have a specific body. But we humans have their own body, and also our recognition is occurring between the world and our body. So some radical philosophers specialized in philosophy of mind states that our mind exists not in the mind, but it exists in the world. So our mind occurs the surface of our body. So in a sense. So in that way, I partly agree with that standpoint. Our mind is not necessarily coming from our brain, but from our body or interaction with the world. So from that perspective, talking about AI, yeah, as I said, if in the future, if AI has his or her own body, that's another story. But now there is a kind of difference between they and us.
So related to the previous question, I would like to ask one more question about technology. And so technology changes the lines between art, design, craft, and science less clear. So what do you think the role of aesthetics in that sense? What kind of role can aesthetics can play?
As I delivered in my talk, aesthetics can be a catalyst between different worlds. So, as you said, the technology is now breaking the division between art, design, and other activities. However, in order to destroy the boundary, we need some techniques. We need some knowledge about the different fields. So concerning aesthetics, as I stated, aesthetics is located in between philosophy and art and other fields. So I hope some specialists in aesthetics can be a catalyst between 2 or 3 different kind of fields. That will be one main task of aesthetics in the near future.
There's a couple questions online, and one is from Raquel Nakayama, and she congratulates Professor Hoshino. Thank you for presenting a difficult subject matter, art and philosophy. I congratulate you too for being a Superman through music, photography, and many more talents. Her question basically was a question that Kigoshi-san asked, but I'd like to elaborate that in the sense that when you were younger, you had mentioned that you were searching for different niches through film or music and trying to seek that. But she asked, did you actually have like an aha moment when that shifted you to where you are presently, what you are presently doing?
Thinking of my teens and 20s, I didn't have a specific moment. Instead, gradually, I made my position or made my stance between the theory and practice. So I don't have a specific moment for my career. So that's my answer. Yeah, and there is no such a dramatic moment for me. But gradually, little by little, I was always shifting between 2 or different worlds, and finally, I now became a specialist in aesthetics. So I could possibly be an artist. I don't know, but so finally, as I am now. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question from Jerry Thornhill, and he asks, although it can be far from nature, how does manga fit into aesthetics?
I love some mangas, and yeah, as an individual, I like manga so much. And I have some colleagues who are examining mangas as an aesthetic object or like cultural resources. But myself, I don't have a specific opinion or specific reflection on that genre. I only read and I only enjoy mangas. And so, as I said, I have some colleagues. So if I want to know some more specific analysis or more concrete observations, I always ask to my colleagues about their opinions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This is actually a personal question that I'd like to ask within your while you're teaching at Todai, and may I ask how are the students that you're teaching these days thinking about philosophy, or the genre of philosophy, and how do they apply that to their lives? In your perspective, how do you see that?
That's a very important point because, like, October is the beginning of a new semester in the universities of Japan, and so now it is the very beginning of the autumn semester in my university as well, and so I will explain about some a bit complicated structure of my university, U Tokyo. So I'm teaching now at College of Arts and Sciences, U Tokyo, and it is a college for first and second year students. And so I mainly teach philosophy for the first and second year students, both in humanities and in natural sciences. So I have a lecture on contemporary philosophy, and half of the attendants are from natural sciences. So for me, it is a very exciting situation because I teach philosophy not only for the humanities students, but also social sciences and natural sciences students. So it's the most, in a sense, exciting lecture for me. And then I also have a seminar or a lecture for the graduate students. And I belong to the Department of Interdisciplinary Cultural Studies. And some students are doing philosophy, and other students are doing contemporary art or other art forms. So, like in my seminar, there are always different kind of students. So a student are doing film studies, another students are doing contemporary art. So in that framework, this semester, I'm doing a seminar on the methods for humanities. So that means graduate students knows their own ways of doing research, philosophy, contemporary art, film studies, and so on. But with different kinds of students, I'm organizing a seminar examining what's the humanities. So I have a different kinds of lecture and seminar for undergrads and for graduate students. And both are very stimulating for me because, as I said, for the younger generation, I teach philosophy for both human sciences, social sciences, and natural sciences students, and also for like more specific field for my graduate students. As I said, I'm teaching about humanities, examining it from a different kinds of perspective. So that's the way I'm teaching now.
Related to Sawako's question, I'd like to add one more question. So your career is very unique, and so what kind of approach of learning and thinking would you recommend to the researchers or students who are interested in both art and philosophy at the same time? So what kind of approach is appropriate for those people? What do you think?
Thank you for your question. The most important is that to do different things. So I sometimes tell my students to do different things simultaneously. So most of the students are doing one thing, biology, physics, philosophy, economics. But in my sense, what's important is to do one more subject or one more specialty. So for me, aesthetics was inherently hybrid discipline, spanning philosophy and art. But even in other fields, such as literature or history, they can learn another discipline different from their main topics. So not only for researchers, but also for artists as well, maybe what's important is to do different things, 2 or 3. So that's the basic, more or less basic advice for the young scholars and artists.
So, in the sense, do you have any other colleagues who are doing the similar kind of academic work at your university or in the universities all around the world?
I have to say that most of my colleagues are doing their own specialty. They are working on their topics. And so in every field and every discipline is specialized in one topic, one subject, one research question. So I rarely meet colleagues who are doing different things. But in some cases, like a philosopher Boyan Manchev, as I mentioned in my talk, he is a real interdisciplinary person who are doing both philosophy and art. So in abroad, I sometimes meet my colleagues who are both interested in these 2 fields. But here, I rarely meet that kind of colleagues.
So this connection between art and philosophy is kind of interdisciplinary, right? So how do you, when you talk about to your students, I mean, do you feel that they instinctively understand the importance of ethics? How do you frame it in a way, and even with your colleagues? Like, why do you think society needs to focus on aesthetics from your perspective, and how is that best done?
So maybe I will repeat my point in my talk. What's important is that moving between 2 domains, 2 fields. So in the experience of appreciating art, we feel the artworks in front of us. And at the same time, we reflect on the experience from that appreciation. So my basic stance is that we have to move back and forth between the 2 domain of our faculty, in a sense. So, like, as you said, we feel that's true, and also we think. And that's important is that we feel and think. So some art lovers only appreciate the artworks, and other kind of art lovers only reflect on the context or background of artworks. Some art goers just reading the caption or text, and other art goers are watching the paintings and sculpture, and that's it. But the important is that 2 back and forth between the 2 faculties. So that's my answer to your question. Thank you.